There is a strange reason many dreams die before they ever become reality. It is not lack of talent. Not lack of opportunity. Not even fear of failure. Most dreams die because they are spoken too early. They are exposed before they are protected. Shared before they are built. Announced before they are rooted deeply enough to survive doubt. And the strange part is that most people do not realize this until it is too late. A dream feels powerful when it first enters your life. It arrives quietly, but it changes the atmosphere inside you. Suddenly ordinary things stop satisfying you the same way. The life you once accepted begins feeling smaller. You start imagining a future that does not match your current circumstances. And for a moment, the vision feels almost sacred, like something that was trusted to you personally. But then comes the temptation to speak. You want to tell people what you are becoming. You want to explain the future you can already see in your mind. You want someone to confirm that what you feel is real. So you begin sharing pieces of the dream before the dream has had time to develop strength. That is where many lives quietly change direction. Because not everyone who listens to your dream has the capacity to protect it. Some people hear your future through the limitations of their own lives. Some hear your ambition and immediately compare it to their fears. Others smile politely while silently deciding you are unrealistic. And even when no one openly attacks you, doubt has a strange way of entering through subtle reactions. A pause. A laugh. A careless comment. A look that says, "You?" That is sometimes all it takes. The human mind is fragile in the early stages of belief. Before results appear, confidence depends heavily on protection. A dream that is constantly exposed to disbelief begins absorbing it slowly. That is why silence is more powerful than most people understand. Silence protects things while they are still growing roots. There was once a young man who learned this lesson in a painful way. He was not extraordinary in the eyes of the world. No influence. No powerful background. No visible signs that greatness was waiting for him somewhere in the future. Outwardly, his life looked average. But inwardly, something had started burning. He could feel it during ordinary moments. While walking through crowded streets. While listening to conversations that no longer interested him. While staring at the ceiling late at night wondering why his current life felt too small for whatever was waking up inside him. He carried a vision he could not fully explain yet, but he could feel its weight. The problem was that he thought excitement meant readiness. So he started talking. At first, it felt harmless. He shared ideas with friends. Mentioned his plans casually. Spoke about the future as if speaking it aloud would somehow speed up its arrival. And for a moment, the attention felt good. People listened. Some encouraged him. Others looked impressed. The emotional reward of being seen made him feel closer to success than he actually was. But words can create a dangerous illusion. Sometimes talking about a dream gives the brain the same emotional satisfaction as accomplishing it. The applause arrives before the work. The recognition arrives before the discipline. And slowly, the hunger that once pushed you forward begins weakening because part of your mind already feels rewarded. The young man did not realize this at first. What he noticed instead was that his focus began changing. He spent more time explaining than building. More time imagining than practicing. More time describing the future than preparing for it. And while he kept talking, life stayed exactly the same. That frustrated him deeply. Because nothing hurts like feeling called towards something bigger while remaining trapped inside ordinary reality. Every morning he woke up carrying the same vision, but the world kept responding to the older version of him. People judged him by his current circumstances, not by the future growing silently inside him. And eventually, the gap between those two realities started exhausting him. One night, after another long conversation where someone politely dismissed his ambitions as unrealistic, he sat alone in silence thinking about how quickly people kill what they do not understand. Not always intentionally. Sometimes they simply cannot see beyond their own limitations. They project their fears onto your future and call it wisdom. That was the moment something changed inside him. For the first time, he stopped asking whether the dream was too big. Instead, he started asking whether he had exposed it too early. And that question altered the direction of his life completely. Because some things grow stronger in silence. Seeds grow underground. Muscles rebuild in rest. Character develops in hidden moments nobody applauds. And perhaps dreams work the same way. The young man began noticing that the people who accomplished meaningful things were often quieter than everyone else. They moved differently. They did not constantly announce every plan. They did not seek approval for unfinished work. They understood that energy scattered through endless explanation leaves very little strength for execution. So he became quieter. Not out of fear. Out of understanding. He stopped explaining himself to people committed to misunderstanding him. He stopped announcing goals before taking action. He stopped seeking emotional validation from listeners who had never built anything themselves. Instead, he started protecting the vision privately. At first, the silence felt lonely. But over time, something unexpected began happening. The dream that once depended on excitement started developing discipline. And discipline changes a person in ways motivation never can. Because motivation is emotional. Discipline is identity. And identity survives long after emotion disappears. The next stage of his journey would force him to learn the difference between wanting a dream and becoming the kind of person capable of carrying it without destroying it. The first real battle of a dream is not failure. It is distraction. Most people think dreams die because life becomes difficult. Sometimes that happens. But more often, dreams disappear slowly beneath noise. Endless conversations. Endless entertainment. Endless comparison. Endless explaining. Attention gets scattered in 100 different directions until the vision that once felt alive becomes weak from neglect. The young man started noticing this everywhere. People talked constantly about the lives they wanted, but very few protected the habits required to build those lives. Everyone seemed emotionally attached to success, yet almost nobody was willing to tolerate the silence, repetition, and boredom that real transformation demands. The world celebrated visible ambition while ignoring invisible discipline. And slowly, he realized he had been doing the same thing. He had fallen in love with the image of the future more than the process required to reach it. That realization hurt. Because deep down, he knew he was capable of more than he was currently producing. The problem was not potential. Potential is common. Almost everyone has unrealized potential. The problem was focus. He still carried too many distractions disguised as normal behavior. So he started removing things quietly. Not everything at once. Transformation almost never happens dramatically. It happens through repeated private decisions that nobody notices in the beginning. He spent less time arguing online. Less time seeking opinions. Less time consuming endless noise that left his mind exhausted and unfocused. At first, the emptiness felt uncomfortable. Silence has a strange effect on human beings. When external noise disappears, internal noise becomes louder. Thoughts you avoided begin rising to the surface. Fear becomes easier to hear. So does insecurity. Many people keep themselves constantly distracted not because they enjoy distraction, but because quiet forces them to confront themselves honestly. The young man experienced that firsthand. Without constant stimulation surrounding him, he became aware of how much fear was actually driving his behavior. Fear of being unnoticed. Fear of failing publicly. Fear that years of effort might lead nowhere. Fear that he was wasting his life chasing something unrealistic. And beneath all of it was another fear he rarely admitted. The fear of remaining ordinary forever. That fear haunted him more than failure itself. Because there is a particular kind of pain that comes from feeling something meaningful inside you while living a life that does not reflect it yet. Outwardly, everything may appear stable. But inwardly, you feel disconnected from your own potential. Days begin blending together. Time moves, but you do not feel yourself moving with it. And eventually, a person reaches one of two conclusions. Either the dream must die, or the old version of them must. That is where the young man found himself. He realized he could not keep carrying the same habits into the future he claimed to want. The dream demanded a different identity, different routines, different priorities, different standards, and perhaps most painfully, different relationships. Growth changes your relationship with people. Not because success makes you superior, but because focus creates distance. The moment you stop participating in constant distraction, some people begin feeling uncomfortable around you. Your discipline silently confronts the compromises they continue making. And many would rather criticize your change than examine their own lives honestly. The young man began experiencing that tension slowly. Friends complained he had become distant. Others mocked his seriousness. Some accused him of thinking he was better than everyone else simply because he stopped wasting time the same way they did. Earlier, those reactions would have shaken him deeply. Now he started seeing them differently. Not every misunderstanding requires explanation. That realization freed enormous energy inside him. Because explaining yourself constantly is exhausting. Trying to make everyone understand your choices drains emotional strength that could have been used building your future instead. And often, people only understand transformation after results appear anyway. Nobody claps for hidden growth. Not in the beginning. When a seed grows underground, the world sees nothing happening. Yet beneath the surface, roots are forming strong enough to carry future weight. If the growth happened visibly too early, the plant would collapse under pressure it was not ready to survive. Human lives work similarly. The strongest transformations often happen privately first. So the young man committed himself to hidden work. He developed routines nobody praised him for. He practiced when nobody watched. He studied when nobody checked on him. Some nights he felt powerful. Other nights he felt foolish. But he kept going because he finally understood something dangerous about modern life. Most people are addicted to visible progress. If growth cannot immediately be posted, shared, or recognized, they lose motivation. But meaningful change rarely announces itself quickly. Real growth feels repetitive long before it feels rewarding. And the people who eventually succeed are often simply the people who learned how to continue during seasons where nothing looked impressive externally. That season changed him deeply. He became more patient, more observant, less reactive. Earlier, every opinion affected him emotionally. Now he started protecting his mental environment carefully. He understood that attention is one of the most valuable forms of energy a human being possesses. Whatever consistently holds your attention eventually shapes your identity. So he became selective. Selective about conversations. Selective about influences. Selective about where his energy went each day. And as his focus sharpened, something surprising happened. The dream itself became clearer. Earlier, it had been tangled with ego and fantasy. He imagined recognition, applause, admiration. But silence began stripping those illusions away. Without constant external validation feeding his imagination, he started asking harder questions. Would I still pursue this if nobody praised me? Would the work still matter if the world never fully understood it? Am I chasing purpose, or am I chasing attention? Those questions forced honesty. And honesty changes a dream. Because once ego starts dying, purpose becomes visible underneath it. The dream stops being about proving your worth to others and starts becoming about becoming faithful to what was placed inside you. That shift marked the beginning of real maturity. But life was about to test that maturity in a much harder way. Because protecting a dream in silence is one thing. Continuing to believe in it after disappointment is something else entirely. And the next season would force him to discover whether his discipline was truly strong enough to survive failure. Failure rarely arrives dramatically at first. Most of the time, it begins quietly. A missed opportunity. A plan that does not work. A door that never opens. A season where effort and results stop matching each other. The world imagines failure as one catastrophic moment, but real failure usually feels slower than that. It feels like giving everything you have while life responds with silence. That was the season the young man entered next. For a long time, discipline had made him feel powerful. Every early morning, every private sacrifice, every hour spent building in silence gave him the feeling that progress was inevitable. He believed consistency would eventually force life to reward him. But life does not always move according to effort alone. Months passed, and outwardly almost nothing changed. The dream still lived inside him, but reality remained stubbornly ordinary. There were no dramatic breakthroughs. No sudden recognition. No clear sign that all the sacrifice was leading somewhere meaningful. And slowly, disappointment began pressing against his mind. That kind of disappointment is dangerous because it attacks identity, not just emotion. When someone fails repeatedly after publicly chasing success, they can blame bad luck. But when a person suffers privately, in silence, without applause or witnesses, something more painful happens. They begin questioning themselves. The young man started wondering whether he had mistaken obsession for purpose. Whether all the discipline, all the silence, all the sacrifices were simply elaborate ways of avoiding an ordinary life he secretly feared. Those thoughts became louder during lonely nights. And loneliness changes thoughts. During the day, people distract themselves through activity. But at night, when the world grows quiet, hidden fears gain a voice. Questions become heavier. Doubt becomes more convincing. Exhaustion lowers emotional defenses, and suddenly the future that once inspired you begins feeling impossibly far away. One evening, after another setback he could barely explain to anyone else, he sat in silence staring at the ceiling for hours. He felt emotionally numb. Not dramatic sadness. Something colder than that. The exhaustion that comes from carrying hope for too long without visible proof that it matters. That is the moment many dreams die. Not during public humiliation. Not during obvious defeat. They die during quiet exhaustion. When continuing no longer feels emotionally rewarding. When effort becomes repetitive. When nobody sees the struggle. When life keeps moving while your breakthrough remains invisible. The young man understood that feeling now more than ever. And for the first time in years, he seriously considered quitting. Not loudly. Not emotionally. Quietly. That is how people abandon dreams most often. They do not announce surrender. They slowly stop trying. They lower standards. Delay routines. Become less disciplined. Less hopeful. Less alive. Eventually they convince themselves they are being realistic when in truth they are simply tired of hurting. He almost became one of those people. But something unexpected interrupted that downward spiral. He began remembering who he used to be before the dream entered his life. The version of him that accepted mediocrity easily. The version that wasted time carelessly. The version that avoided discomfort whenever possible. And suddenly he realized something terrifying. Even though the dream had not fully materialized yet, the process had already transformed him. The discipline, the silence, the struggle, the repeated disappointments, all of it had changed the structure of his character. He was no longer the same person who started. That realization shifted everything. Because earlier, he believed the dream existed only to produce external success. Money. Recognition. Achievement. But now he started understanding something deeper. Sometimes the pursuit changes you before the destination arrives. Sometimes the process itself is part of the reward. The silence had taught him focus. The discipline had taught him consistency. The disappointment had taught him endurance. And endurance is rare. Most people can stay motivated when life responds quickly. Very few can continue when results disappear for long periods of time. Yet those seasons often reveal the difference between interest and commitment. Interest works when conditions feel comfortable. Commitment survives discomfort. The young man decided he would continue. Not because he suddenly felt inspired again. Not because fear disappeared. But because he understood that quitting from exhaustion would create a deeper pain later. Temporary failure hurts. Regret lasts much longer. Years later, he knew he would rather remember himself as someone who kept trying than someone who abandoned his future out of fear and fatigue. So he returned to work quietly. But this time something inside him had changed. Earlier, he worked emotionally, driven by excitement and imagination. Now he worked steadily, calmly, without needing constant emotional highs. He finally understood that maturity is not doing great things occasionally when motivation appears. Maturity is remaining faithful repeatedly when motivation disappears. That realization made him stronger. He stopped measuring progress daily. He stopped expecting immediate breakthroughs. Instead, he focused on becoming consistent enough that success, if it ever arrived, would find him prepared instead of unstable. And strangely, once he stopped obsessing over results, his mind became clearer. He started noticing opportunities he would have ignored earlier. He listened more carefully, observed more deeply. Earlier, desperation made him impatient. Now patience sharpened his awareness. He realized life often moves slowly not because nothing is happening, but because foundations are being built underneath the surface. A tree that grows too fast breaks easily in storms. Strong roots require time nobody celebrates. That understanding gave him peace during uncertainty. Not perfect peace. Doubt still visited him sometimes. Fear still returned during difficult nights. But now those emotions no longer controlled his direction completely. He had learned one of the most important truths about dreams. You do not need constant confidence to continue. You only need enough courage for the next step. And step by step, quietly, almost invisibly, his life was beginning to move towards something greater than he had imagined in the beginning. But the next lesson would be even harder. Because success introduces temptations failure never can. And soon he would discover that the world becomes most dangerous not when nobody believes in you, but when people finally start paying attention. Success changes people. Not always because success itself is evil, but because attention changes the atmosphere around a person. When nobody notices you, your struggles remain private. Your intentions stay pure more easily. But the moment progress becomes visible, new temptations appear quietly alongside opportunity. The young man was beginning to experience that shift. For years, he had lived in silence. Working privately. Building slowly. Fighting discouragement without applause. But eventually, something started changing outwardly. Small results appeared first. Then opportunities. Then recognition. Nothing massive at the beginning, just enough movement for people to notice that his life was no longer standing still. And suddenly, the same people who once ignored his vision became curious about it. That is one of the strangest parts of human nature. People rarely believe in seeds. They believe in trees. When the dream was invisible, most dismissed it. Now that visible evidence existed, conversations changed. People who once questioned his ambition began speaking as if they had supported him all along. Others started treating him differently simply because success appeared possible now. Earlier in life, that change would have excited him completely. Now it made him cautious. Because he had learned something during the years of silence. Attention is not always support. Sometimes attention is simply attraction to visible momentum. Many people do not love the process that built you. They love proximity to visible progress. And if you are not careful, success can seduce you into becoming performative again. The young man felt that temptation growing quietly inside him. After spending years hidden, recognition felt powerful. Compliments affected him more than he expected. Praise became emotionally addictive. Every sign of approval gave temporary validation to the parts of him that had suffered through doubt for years. At first, he justified it harmlessly. After all, had he not earned this moment? Had he not sacrificed enough already? But slowly, something dangerous began happening. The attention started pulling his focus outward again. Earlier, silence protected his energy. Now visibility demanded performance. More opinions surrounded him. More expectations. More pressure to constantly appear successful. And appearance is exhausting. Because once people begin associating you with growth, they unconsciously expect constant momentum. Constant confidence. Constant clarity. The world celebrates success but rarely understands the emotional weight that often comes with maintaining it. The young man started feeling that pressure deeply. He became more aware of how others perceived him. More careful with words. More sensitive to criticism. Earlier, when nobody watched him, failure felt private. Now even small mistakes felt exposed. The fear of losing progress became almost stronger than the original fear of failure itself. That realization disturbed him. Because he recognized the feeling immediately. It was the same insecurity he thought he had escaped years ago, only dressed differently now. Earlier, he feared insignificance. Now he feared losing significance. Different forms of fear. Same emotional prison. And fear always demands sacrifice. If you obey fear long enough, it slowly reshapes your identity around protection instead of purpose. The young man noticed himself becoming emotionally divided. One part of him still wanted meaningful work. Another part wanted admiration. Earlier, the dream felt sacred because it came from deep purpose. Now ego was trying to attach itself to the outcome again. That is why silence matters even after success begins. Most people think silence is only necessary during struggle. But visibility can corrupt a dream just as easily as doubt can. The moment a person becomes addicted to attention, they start making decisions based on audience reaction instead of inner conviction. The young man refused to let that happen completely. So he disappeared again for a while. Not permanently. Just enough to hear himself clearly. Enough to separate purpose from performance before the noise around him became stronger than the truth inside him. He spent time alone thinking honestly about who he was becoming. And what he discovered frightened him. Part of him no longer wanted the dream itself. Part of him wanted the emotional rewards attached to it. Recognition. Status. Validation. The feeling of finally being seen after years of invisibility. None of those desires were completely evil, but they were dangerous if they became central. Because applause cannot sustain a human soul. It only excites it temporarily. The crowd that praises you today may disappear tomorrow. Public attention shifts constantly. If identity becomes dependent on recognition, peace becomes impossible to maintain. You start living emotionally at the mercy of other people's reactions. The young man did not want that life. He remembered the quiet version of himself from earlier years. The disciplined version. The focused version. The person who built privately without needing constant validation. And he realized something powerful. The silence that once protected the dream now needed to protect the dreamer. So he returned to certain habits quietly. More solitude. More reflection. More hidden work nobody applauded. At first, people misunderstood the distance again. Some assumed success had changed him negatively. Others accused him of becoming secretive. But he no longer felt responsible for explaining every decision. Maturity had taught him that not every season requires public understanding. Some things must remain protected to remain pure. That season restored clarity inside him slowly. He remembered why the dream mattered in the first place. Not to impress people. Not to escape insecurity. But because something meaningful had been entrusted to him, and meaningful things deserve stewardship, not performance. And stewardship requires discipline. It requires emotional control during both failure and success. It requires knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. It requires understanding that visibility is not always growth. Sometimes true growth still happens privately even after the world begins noticing you. The young man carried that lesson deeply now. Because he finally understood that dreams do not only die through fear and doubt. Sometimes they die through ego. Through overexposure. Through the desperate need to constantly prove something to the world. But the strongest dreams survive because they remain connected to purpose instead of applause. And purpose has a way of enduring storms that ego never can. The next stage of his journey would test that understanding more painfully than ever before. Because eventually life strips away recognition, comfort, and certainty from almost everyone. And when that moment arrives, the question becomes brutally simple. Who are you when nobody is clapping anymore? There comes a moment in almost every meaningful journey where the noise disappears. The messages slow down. The excitement fades. The attention shifts somewhere else. And suddenly, after all the movement, all the progress, all the recognition you thought would finally satisfy you, you find yourself alone again with the same question that existed in the beginning. Who are you when nobody is watching? The young man entered that season unexpectedly. For a while, life had felt like momentum. Doors opened. People noticed him. Opportunities appeared that once seemed impossible. The dream was no longer invisible. But success has cycles, and cycles change without asking permission. Slowly, the energy around him shifted. Projects failed. Certain relationships disappeared. Support became inconsistent. And the people who once celebrated him loudly became quieter when his progress stopped looking exciting. At first, he resisted emotionally. He tried working harder. Talking more. Pushing himself beyond exhaustion to recreate the momentum he feared losing. But desperation rarely produces clarity. It usually produces noise. And the more emotionally frantic he became, the more disconnected he felt from himself. One night, after hours of trying unsuccessfully to force motivation back into his mind, he sat alone in complete silence. No music. No phone. No distractions. Just silence. And for the first time in a long time, he stopped trying to become something. He simply allowed himself to be honest. Honest about the exhaustion. Honest about the fear. Honest about how deeply he still depended on visible progress to feel valuable. That honesty broke something open inside him. Because underneath all the ambition, all the discipline, all the growth, he discovered a painful truth. Part of him still believed he needed achievement to deserve peace. Somewhere deep inside, he had connected worth with productivity. If he was succeeding, he felt meaningful. If he was struggling, he secretly felt smaller. Many people live their entire lives trapped in that cycle. Always chasing. Always proving. Always performing. Never resting. Because they believe silence means failure and stillness means losing. But silence reveals things motion hides. And during that season, the young man began understanding something life-changing. The dream was never supposed to replace his identity. It was supposed to flow from it. Earlier, he treated success like salvation. He believed reaching the future would finally heal the insecurity inside him. But no achievement can permanently heal a wound that requires inner transformation. Success can distract insecurity. It cannot cure it. That realization humbled him deeply. For years, he thought the greatest danger was other people doubting him. Now he realized the greater danger was building an entire life while secretly remaining disconnected from himself. Because eventually external success becomes unstable if internal peace does not exist beneath it. So instead of forcing movement, he became still. And stillness changed him. He started noticing how addicted modern life is to stimulation. People fear silence because silence exposes what constant activity hides. A person can spend years appearing productive while emotionally running from themselves. But when life finally slows down, unresolved emptiness rises to the surface. The young man stopped running. He walked more slowly. Thought more deeply. Spent time away from constant information. And little by little, his mind became clearer than it had been in years. He realized he had spent too much of life trying to arrive somewhere instead of learning how to live where he already was. The future mattered, yes. But peace could not always remain postponed until achievement appeared. Otherwise life would become one endless chase where satisfaction kept moving further away. That understanding softened something inside him. For the first time in years, he stopped treating every ordinary moment as an obstacle between himself and success. He began appreciating simple things again. Quiet mornings. Conversations without hidden ambition. The feeling of working without needing immediate recognition. And strangely, as that inner pressure weakened, creativity returned naturally. Not forced creativity. Not desperate ambition. Clear creativity. Because exhaustion had finally stopped controlling his mind. That was when he understood one of the deepest truths about silence. Silence is not empty. It is restorative. A forest grows in silence. Healing happens in silence. Roots deepen in silence. And human beings rediscover themselves there too. The young man no longer feared stillness the way he once did. Earlier, silence felt dangerous because it forced him to confront uncertainty. Now silence became a refuge from the endless pressure to constantly perform for the world. He stopped measuring his life through comparison. Stopped obsessing over timelines. Stopped panicking because someone else succeeded faster. That shift gave him emotional freedom he had never experienced before. Because comparison quietly poisons dreams. The moment you begin measuring your journey against someone else's timing, your peace disappears. You stop building faithfully and start performing anxiously. Every delay feels personal. Every success of another person feels like evidence that you are falling behind. But lives are not meant to unfold identically. Different people require different seasons. Some stories grow fast and collapse early. Others develop slowly and endure. The young man accepted that now. And once he accepted it, the dream became healthier inside him. Less desperate. Less ego-driven. More grounded. He still wanted to build something meaningful. Still wanted to fulfill the vision that once awakened him years ago. But now he no longer needed the dream to prove his value as a human being. That changed the way he worked completely. Because people do their strongest work when fear stops controlling their identity. When they are no longer creating from desperation, but from alignment. From clarity. From purpose. And quietly, almost invisibly, life began moving again. Not dramatically. Not loudly. But steadily. The kind of steady growth that survives because it is no longer built on emotional instability. The young man was finally becoming dangerous in the best possible way. Not because he had become louder. But because he had learned how to remain centered even in silence. And that lesson would prepare him for the final stage of the journey, the moment where he would fully understand why some dreams are trusted only to people capable of protecting them quietly before revealing them powerfully. By the time the young man entered the next season of his life, something fundamental had changed inside him. Earlier, he chased the dream emotionally. Then he protected it silently. Then he nearly lost himself trying to prove it. Now, for the first time, he was learning how to carry it peacefully. That difference matters more than most people realize. Because a dream carried through insecurity becomes pressure. A dream carried through ego becomes performance. But a dream carried through inner peace becomes purpose. And purpose moves differently. It no longer needs constant validation to survive. The young man still worked hard. Still sacrificed. Still stayed disciplined. But now there was less desperation in his movements. Earlier, every setback felt like a threat to his identity. Every delay felt personal. Every opinion felt heavy. Now he had developed something stronger than motivation. He had developed stability. And stability changes the way a person sees the world. For the first time in years, he stopped obsessing over how long the journey was taking. He realized something important about human beings. Most people are not destroyed by difficulty itself. They are destroyed by the belief that difficulty means nothing is happening. But growth often hides itself while it is happening. A tree does not become strong during sunny days alone. Storms force roots deeper into the ground. Resistance strengthens structure. Pressure reveals weaknesses that comfort keeps hidden. The young man understood now that many painful seasons had not been interruptions to the process. They had been part of the process itself. That realization gave meaning to suffering. Not romanticized suffering. Not meaningless pain. Purposeful refinement. And once suffering gains meaning, endurance becomes possible. He began looking back at earlier versions of himself differently. The insecure young man desperate for recognition. The exhausted version nearly ready to quit. The distracted version who spoke too much and protected too little. Earlier, he felt ashamed of those stages. Now he understood they were necessary. Because wisdom is rarely inherited. Most wisdom is survived. People become deep through experience, not information alone. You can read about patience for years and still panic when life delays your breakthrough. You can understand discipline intellectually and still collapse emotionally during disappointment. Certain truths only become real after suffering burns them into your character personally. The young man carried those truths now. And because of that, something unexpected started happening around him. People began asking him different questions. Earlier, they asked about success. About goals. About outcomes. Now they asked about peace. About focus. About how he remained grounded despite uncertainty. That surprised him deeply. Because he finally understood that the strongest thing about a person is not always visible achievement. Sometimes the strongest thing is emotional steadiness. Calmness under pressure. Clarity during chaos. The ability to continue without becoming bitter. And bitterness had tempted him many times. There were seasons where resentment almost consumed him. Watching less disciplined people succeed faster. Watching shallow people receive more attention. Watching life seem unfair in ways nobody could explain properly. Bitterness always begins quietly. First disappointment enters the heart. Then comparison feeds it. Then resentment slowly reshapes perception until a person becomes emotionally trapped inside frustration. The young man came dangerously close to that trap more than once. But silence saved him again. Because silence forces reflection. And reflection eventually reveals an uncomfortable truth. Envy is often grief disguised as anger. People resent others when they secretly feel abandoned by their own progress. But comparison cannot heal abandonment. It only deepens it. Once he understood that, he stopped competing emotionally with everyone around him. He focused on alignment instead. Alignment with his values. Alignment with his purpose. Alignment with the kind of person he wanted to become privately, not just publicly. That shift freed enormous energy inside him. Because competition exhausts the mind when identity depends on winning constantly. But alignment creates peace because the standard becomes internal integrity rather than external applause. And strangely, once he stopped obsessing over outcomes completely, opportunities expanded naturally. People trusted him more. His work became clearer. His thinking became sharper. Not because he was trying harder, but because emotional noise no longer controlled his attention every day. That is the hidden power of silence most people never discover. Silence trains perception. When your life becomes less crowded by distraction, you begin noticing truths others miss. You notice patterns, intentions, energy. You recognize how many people speak constantly because they are afraid of confronting themselves quietly. You realize how much of modern life is performance disguised as confidence. And once you see that clearly, your relationship with words changes forever. The young man became more careful with speech. Not fearful. Intentional. He understood now that words carry energy. Every promise spoken publicly creates emotional pressure. Every unnecessary explanation leaks focus. Every premature announcement exposes fragile things to opinions they were never ready to survive. So he learned restraint. And restraint is rare in a loud world. Anyone can react instantly. Anyone can announce every thought. Anyone can chase attention temporarily. But restraint requires strength. The strength to build quietly while others perform loudly. The strength to remain patient while the world demands instant visibility. The strength to let results mature before speaking about them. That strength changed his future. Because eventually, after years of hidden growth, disciplined silence, emotional battles, disappointment, healing, and rebuilding, the dream finally stood strong enough to survive exposure. Not because the world suddenly became kinder, but because he had become stronger. Earlier, criticism could have destroyed him emotionally. Now it simply informed him. Earlier, rejection felt personal. Now it felt directional. Earlier, he needed people to believe in the dream for him to continue. Now belief had roots too deep to depend on external approval. That is the moment a dream truly becomes powerful. Not when everyone sees it, but when it no longer depends on being seen to survive. And standing there, looking back at the years of silence that once felt lonely, the young man finally understood something that changed his life forever. The silence had never been empty. It had been preparation. Preparation rarely feels meaningful while you are inside it. That is why so many people abandon the process too early. When life is developing you quietly, there are usually no visible signs proving it. No applause. No dramatic transformation overnight. Most days feel repetitive, ordinary, unremarkable. And because human beings naturally crave visible progress, many mistake hidden preparation for wasted time. The young man used to think that way too. Earlier in life, he believed movement always had to look impressive. He thought growth should feel exciting constantly. He imagined purpose as something dramatic, something that would arrive with certainty and recognition. But silence taught him something different. The most important transformations are often invisible while they are happening. A heart becomes stronger invisibly. Wisdom develops invisibly. Character forms invisibly. And because those things cannot always be measured immediately, impatient people often quit before the deeper work finishes inside them. The young man understood that now. Looking back, he realized the years he once called stagnant had actually been foundational. The loneliness forced self-awareness. The disappointment created endurance. The silence sharpened focus. Even the delays had protected him from becoming successful before he was emotionally prepared to carry success responsibly. That realization humbled him deeply. Because he finally saw how dangerous early success could have been for the person he used to be. Earlier, recognition would have inflated his ego. Attention would have distracted him. Achievement without maturity might have destroyed the very purpose he was trying to fulfill. Life had not been punishing him through delay. Life had been preparing him through it. That changed the meaning of everything he suffered. And once suffering gains meaning, gratitude becomes possible even for painful seasons. The young man started noticing how differently mature people carry themselves compared to insecure people. Insecure people rush constantly. They need immediate recognition. Immediate proof. Immediate validation. Mature people move with patience because they understand something deeper than speed. Not every season is meant for visibility. Some seasons exist to strengthen foundations privately. That truth became increasingly obvious everywhere he looked. He noticed how many people built public images stronger than their private character. Outward success. Inward instability. The world celebrates polished appearances so aggressively that many never develop the emotional depth necessary to sustain meaningful lives long term. And eventually, pressure exposes shallow foundations. It always does. The young man had experienced enough storms now to respect depth more than appearance. Earlier, he wanted admiration. Now he valued integrity more. Because admiration can disappear overnight. Integrity remains even when everything external changes. That shift transformed his relationships too. He became less interested in impressing people and more interested in understanding them. Earlier, he judged relationships based on excitement and approval. Now he looked for honesty, peace, emotional maturity. He realized many people speak constantly because silence terrifies them. They fill every empty space with noise because quietness would force them to confront unresolved emptiness inside themselves. But the young man no longer feared quiet. Silence had become familiar territory. And familiarity changes fear into wisdom. One evening, while walking alone after a long day, he started thinking about the earliest version of himself, the boy who once believed speaking his dreams loudly would automatically bring them closer to reality. He smiled sadly at the memory. Because now he understood the difference between expression and embodiment. Anyone can describe a future. Very few can become the kind of person capable of carrying it. That is the real work. Not simply achieving goals. Becoming someone strong enough internally that achievement does not destroy your peace once it arrives. The young man realized that was what silence had truly taught him all along. Silence was never only about hiding dreams from negative people. It was about creating space for internal transformation. Without silence, he would have remained emotionally shallow. Reactive. Easily influenced. Addicted to external approval. Silence forced him inward. And inward journeys change lives permanently. He began seeing the world differently after that. He noticed how desperate people were for attention. How quickly they exposed unfinished plans online. How easily they sacrificed peace for visibility. Everyone wanted to be seen immediately, but very few asked themselves whether they were emotionally prepared for what visibility requires. Attention magnifies whatever already exists inside you. If insecurity exists, attention magnifies insecurity. If ego exists, attention magnifies ego. If emptiness exists, success often magnifies emptiness too. That is why some people achieve everything they once wanted and still feel lost afterward. External success cannot organize internal chaos. Only inner work can do that. The young man had spent years doing inner work now, even when he did not fully realize it. And because of that, he no longer felt rushed. That may have been the greatest change of all. Earlier, urgency controlled his emotions. He constantly feared falling behind. Feared being forgotten. Feared wasting time. Now he understood something peaceful about life. A meaningful future cannot be built through panic. Panic creates reaction. Peace creates clarity. And clarity creates sustainable action. That understanding made him more effective than he had ever been before. Ironically, once he stopped obsessing emotionally over the dream every second, his work improved naturally. He listened better. Thought deeper. Created with more honesty. The energy that once leaked into anxiety now strengthened execution instead. And slowly, quietly, steadily, the life he once imagined years ago began becoming real. Not perfectly. Not magically. But truthfully. One decision at a time. One disciplined season at a time. One silent sacrifice at a time. Standing there in the middle of that reality, he finally understood why certain dreams are given only to people willing to protect them quietly before revealing them publicly. Because fragile dreams exposed too early often collapse under pressure. But dreams strengthened through silence develop roots deep enough to survive storms, rejection, envy, delay, and even success itself. And perhaps that is the real power of silence. Silence does not weaken true dreams. It prepares them to live. By now, the young man understood something most people spend their entire lives missing. Dreams are alive. Not physically, of course. But psychologically. Emotionally. Spiritually. They breathe through attention. They grow through discipline. They weaken through neglect. And perhaps most importantly, they react to the environment surrounding them. A dream placed in the wrong environment begins shrinking immediately. That is why some people feel alive in solitude but exhausted in certain crowds. Energy is contagious. Doubt spreads quietly. Fear spreads even faster. Spend enough time around people who have surrendered their own purpose, and eventually they will start teaching you to surrender yours too. Not intentionally. Most broken people do not wake up trying to destroy others. They simply project the limitations they accepted inside themselves. The young man had learned this painfully over the years. Earlier, he believed loyalty meant allowing everyone unlimited access to his mind. Now he understood that access matters. The voices surrounding you eventually become the voice inside you if you listen long enough. That realization forced him to make difficult decisions. Some relationships had to change. Not because he hated people. Not because he thought he was better than them. But because growth sometimes requires distance from environments that repeatedly pull you backward emotionally. Certain conversations left him drained every time. Certain people treated cynicism like intelligence. Others mocked discipline because his consistency quietly exposed their own compromises. And over time, he realized something heartbreaking. Not everyone wants to grow. Some people want comfort more than transformation. Comfort asks very little from you. Growth asks everything. Growth asks for patience when you want speed. Discipline when you want ease. Silence when you want attention. Faith when you want certainty. And because those demands feel heavy, many unconsciously attack anyone who reminds them change is possible. The young man stopped taking that personally. Instead, he became protective of his internal environment. He guarded what entered his mind carefully. What he watched. What he listened to. Who he allowed close during vulnerable seasons. Earlier, he thought protection meant hiding from the world completely. Now he understood mature protection differently. Protection is not isolation. It is discernment. Knowing what strengthens your spirit and what weakens it. Knowing which conversations sharpen your focus and which scatter it. Knowing when to speak and when silence preserves energy better. That discernment changed his daily life profoundly. He became slower to react. Slower to announce plans. Slower to trust quick praise. Earlier, excitement controlled many of his decisions. Now observation came first. He watched people carefully before opening parts of himself to them. Because he finally understood something dangerous about human nature. Many people love access more than responsibility. They want proximity to your vision without understanding the weight it carries. They enjoy hearing dreams because dreams feel inspiring temporarily. But very few are willing to protect fragile things with genuine care. And exposing unfinished parts of yourself to careless people creates wounds that take years to heal emotionally. The young man carried those scars already. That was why he valued silence now. Not as fear. As wisdom. One afternoon, while working quietly, he remembered a season years earlier when he desperately needed everyone to understand him. He smiled at how exhausting that version of himself had been. Constantly explaining. Constantly proving. Constantly searching for validation through agreement. Now he no longer needed universal understanding to continue moving forward. That freedom felt almost sacred. Because once you stop demanding permission from the world to become who you are meant to be, your energy changes completely. Fear loses control little by little. Confidence stops depending on applause. You begin living from inner conviction instead of external reaction. And inner conviction survives storms much longer. The young man still faced uncertainty sometimes. Still experienced difficult days. Still questioned himself occasionally. But doubt no longer paralyzed him the way it once had. Earlier, uncertainty felt like danger. Now he understood uncertainty as part of every meaningful journey. No one sees the entire path clearly from the beginning. Life unfolds progressively. One lesson prepares you for the next lesson. One season builds strength for the next challenge. Trying to control the entire future only creates anxiety. Learning to walk faithfully through the present creates peace. That lesson transformed his relationship with time too. Earlier, he rushed constantly. He compared timelines. Measured his progress against others. Panicked whenever life moved slower than expected. But silence taught him patience differently. Not passive waiting. Intentional preparation. There is a difference. Passive people wait while avoiding growth. Prepared people wait while becoming stronger. The young man became stronger during waiting seasons now. He no longer treated delay as punishment automatically. Sometimes delay protected things from arriving before he could sustain them. Sometimes the slower pace itself was building depth impossible to develop through speed alone. A shallow life grows quickly. A deep life grows carefully. That truth became visible everywhere once he learned to notice it. The strongest people he admired were rarely loud. They carried calmness inside them. A groundedness that did not depend on constant recognition. They understood who they were privately, which made them difficult to shake publicly. The young man wanted that kind of strength more than attention now. Because attention fades. Trends fade. Public opinion changes constantly. But internal peace becomes priceless once you experience it genuinely. And deep down, that was what the dream had been leading him toward all along. Not merely achievement. Alignment. Becoming a person whose inner world remained stable regardless of external fluctuations. That realization healed something inside him permanently. He no longer feared silence. He trusted it. Trusted the quiet seasons. Trusted hidden growth. Trusted that roots invisible today could become strength visible tomorrow. And standing there, looking back over the years of struggle, delay, failure, rebuilding, discipline, loneliness, and transformation, he finally understood the truth that had been waiting for him since the beginning. Some dreams die when spoken because they are searching for attention before developing strength. But dreams protected through silence become powerful enough that eventually they no longer need validation to survive. They simply become reality. Years later, when people looked at the young man's life, most assumed the transformation happened suddenly. That is how the world sees success. People notice the visible chapter and ignore the invisible years that created it. They see confidence without seeing the loneliness that built it. They see discipline without seeing the disappointments that forced it into existence. They see calmness without understanding how many internal wars had to be survived quietly before peace became possible. But the young man remembered everything. He remembered the nights of doubt. The seasons where nothing moved. The moments he almost abandoned the dream completely. He remembered what it felt like to speak too early and watch people handle something sacred carelessly. He remembered the exhaustion of trying to convince everyone around him that the vision inside him mattered. And more than anything, he remembered the silence. At first, silence had felt painful. Now it felt holy. Because silence had protected him from becoming shallow. If success had arrived immediately, he would have lacked depth. If people had believed in him too quickly, he might have depended on external validation forever. If life had unfolded according to his original timeline, he would have gained achievement without developing the emotional strength necessary to sustain it peacefully. But silence changed that. Silence forced him inward. Forced reflection. Forced honesty. Forced growth. And looking back now, he realized the dream was never only about what he would eventually build in the world. The dream had also been building him. That may be the deepest truth of all. Sometimes the vision inside you exists not merely to change your future, but to change your character while you pursue it. The process transforms the person. The waiting deepens the soul. The struggle reveals weaknesses that comfort would have hidden forever. And once you understand that, delay stops feeling meaningless. The young man still carried ambition. Still worked hard. Still dreamed deeply. But now his relationship with success was healthier. Earlier, he needed achievement emotionally. Now he appreciated it without worshipping it. He no longer believed external accomplishment could heal internal emptiness. Peace had to exist first. That realization gave him freedom many people never experience. Freedom from comparison. Freedom from constant performance. Freedom from needing every person to understand his path. Because he finally understood something simple but life-changing. Not every dream is meant to be explained while it is still growing. Some things need darkness before they can survive light. A seed exposed too early dies. Roots develop underground. And human beings are not so different. There are seasons where silence is not weakness. It is wisdom. A season where speaking less protects energy better than endless explanation ever could. A season where hidden work matters more than visible attention. The young man learned to respect those seasons. And eventually, people started asking him how he became so calm. How he stayed focused. How he continued believing through years where nothing looked certain. He would smile quietly when they asked. Because there was no short answer. How do you explain to someone that your greatest growth happened in rooms nobody saw? That your strongest battles were invisible? That silence itself became a teacher? Most people want visible formulas. But transformation rarely happens visibly. It happens privately first. Slowly. Painfully. Quietly. The young man understood now why so many people abandon dreams too early. Not because they lack ability, but because they misunderstand the process. They expect immediate clarity. Immediate recognition. Immediate proof that the journey matters. And when life responds with silence instead, they panic. But silence is not always rejection. Sometimes silence is preparation. Preparation for responsibility. Preparation for pressure. Preparation for the version of you that does not exist yet. And perhaps that is why certain dreams are given carefully. Because dreams powerful enough to transform a life must first transform the person carrying them. Otherwise success arrives before wisdom does, and what could have become meaningful collapses under emotional immaturity. The young man carried that understanding everywhere now. And if he could sit across from the version of himself who once desperately needed everyone's approval, he would say something simple. Protect what is still growing. Not every vision needs an audience. Not every goal needs announcing. Not every dream becomes stronger through exposure. Some things become powerful because they survive silence long enough to develop roots. So work quietly. Build patiently. Let discipline speak louder than excitement. Let results mature before words do. And understand this clearly. The world rewards noise temporarily, but depth is created differently. Depth is created in hidden seasons. In lonely mornings. In disciplined routines. In moments where nobody is clapping and you continue anyway. That is where real strength is born. Not in attention. In consistency. Not in speaking. In becoming. Because in the end, the people who truly change their lives are rarely the ones who talk the most about their dreams. They are usually the ones who protected the dream long enough for it to become reality. And that is the power of silence.